So thanks everybody for joining. It's good to see all of your faces. We were just discussing before the recording started that we're in August already. It's almost September. Depending on which hemisphere you're in, the days may be getting shorter or they may be getting longer. So however it's going, I hope it's going well for you. So today we're going to follow the same typical format we do. We'll do news and updates. We'll get a roadmap update from Oliver. And our community conversation is going to be with Chris and Dan, who have been working with Linkerd for quite a while. They're going to share their experiences as they migrated a monolithic application over to Kubernetes distributed microservices-based application, and how Linkerd played into that. So that's going to be a fun story to hear. I can say that because I know a little bit of the story already, but I hope that you all find it equally as fun as I did. And then there's been some updates with the Helm charts that Alejandro is going to tell us about. It turns out we learn things as we go, and we've learned that there are some better practices that we could have been doing, and Alejandro spearheaded that, and he's going to tell us all about it. We'll announce the August Linkerd Hero. And then as we go through this conversation, if you don't have a question in mind already, you can come up with some questions, and we'll try and stump the maintainer. Or it can just be a regular Q&A, but it's always fun if we can try and find a really difficult question, because sometimes those really difficult questions are turned into things that we run into in real environments and need to understand in order to make sure that our applications are running smoothly and understand the software that we're using. So let's get started. A couple of things, some housekeeping. We've got our Linkerd Community Anchor program continues to thrive and grow. If you are interested in becoming a recognized expert with Linkerd and have some content or some stories that you want to share, either through a blog post or in any medium that you feel comfortable with, we will help you edit and create that content. We can turn it into a proposal, a CFP for some of the conferences if you're interested in submitting for those as well. So really, the Anchor is about taking your experiences and documenting them to share with the rest of the community. And as somebody who has worked with the community for a while now, I've seen folks ask questions similar questions multiple times. And so having a document to share, or blog post, or any sort of a GitHub repository to share with folks, it's really helpful to be able to say, oh, this person in the community just wrote something about that. Let me point you to them. A good example of this is there's a Terraform chart that's, I should have a link to it on hand, that one of the folks in the community wrote. And oftentimes when Terraform comes up, that's the first thing that I'll link to. So this is a good example. There are many other good examples as well. So if you have questions about that, you can jump onto Linkerd Slack. I believe we have an Anchors channel there, but also just reach out to us on the website. You see the URL there, linkerd.io/community/anchor, and we can work with you on that. If you haven't participated yet, we've got our 2021 Linkerd user survey, new and improved for graduated Linkerd, which I don't think that means anything actually, but anyway, the survey really helps the community to understand how you're using Linkerd and what we can do to make it better. That's the end goal. Continue to make something awesome better. We want to awesomize it. So your survey responses will help us with that. And now on to news and updates. Just a few updates today. We've got our Edge releases that are continuing to roll out. We will be pushing out one later today, so that'll be the 4th for this month, and 4th and final for this month. So you see that we're continuing the weekly cadence. The team is working hard to push towards that 2.11 release. So we're all pretty excited about that. In fact, in the last release, the first implementation of policy is available. And so speaking of content, we will be writing up some content on how to use that policy. And then, of course, it'll all be documented as well. So if you are so inclined after today's Edge release, feel free to pull that edge. Actually, please pull that edge and give policy a try so that we know that it's working and that it meets the design patterns and the use cases that folks told us that they wanted. My colleague Jason did a recent presentation with Ambassador, which is super cool. We continue to work with the folks at Ambassador on the emissary ingress. We've recently updated our ingress documentation on that as well to simplify it, of all things. So you now have to do less to get more when you use Linkerd and Ambassador. So if you have questions about that, hit me up on Slack or check out the docs. But definitely take a look at Jason's presentation. And I believe there are some upcoming presentations that we'll have, or webinars, videos that we'll have with them as well. We are updating the Linkerd training course in the Linux Foundation for version 2.10. It was originally written for version 2.8, and so with some of the changes, architectural changes in the control plane specifically that happened in 2.10 and going forward, we're going to update that content so that you are getting the latest and greatest education that your browser can get you. So that's very exciting. If you're taking the course now, the team at edX will notify you of any changes that need to be made in your current in-progress course. And it won't be a huge change from what you're doing already. And then the last thing,
free, right? You don't have to pay. Don't pay them any money.
That's right.
You only have to pay if you want to take the test at the end. There's some way of getting it for free.
Yeah, that is right. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. There are two options, but free is definitely an option. And then the last thing that I have for y'all is that keep your eyes peeled for a surprise that we're working on with the CNCF. We are working on a mascot. It's going to be, now that Linkerd has graduated, I'm really excited about it. And once it's announced, I think you all will like it as well. I'm looking forward to putting a big old sticker on my laptop. So with that,
can you give us any hints, Charles, about the mascot?
Let's see. How can I be opaque?
On a scale of 1 to 10, how cuddly is it?
Oh, it is extremely non-cuddly. It has a carapace. Is that saying too much? And there's a term for the actual structure of the body, but yeah. But
you know, it have a thorax.
It may or may not have a thorax. It's got a monocoque frame, which is a very specific term for creatures of this nature. But I also know this because there's this is such a tangent. I'm so sorry, but there's a motorcycle company that developed a frame based off of a similar type of animal, and it's all one large piece, which is interesting. So anyway.
If you can't guess what it is from all those things, you're just going to have to wait.
That's right. That's right. So sorry for that tangent, but we're excited to share it with you. I'm excited. Any other news or updates from the team that we want to talk about before we move on? All right. Let's get into the roadmap, and I'll kick it over to Oliver for some updates.
Hey, folks. Sorry. Yeah, so I think we basically covered it. We're mostly focused on getting policy out the door. We'll have, over the past couple of weeks, we introduced CRDs in OneEdge, and then 2 weeks ago, we added the first Rust controller, the first control plane controller that's written in Rust. So we're slowly expanding our Rust footprint. And last week, we added proxy support to Mid2 Discovery here. So the way this all works is that the proxy gets configured with the set of ports that are exposed by pod spec, and then we go to discovery for all of those things. That tells us what policies to use. And then as you create server instances or server authorization instances, that gets fed back to the proxy. And so we had a kind of basic version of that in last week's Edge. This week's Edge will include better HTTP support, so we actually do 403s instead of just dropping the connection. We'll have metrics or metric labels exposed that, for all inbound traffic, tell us why we allowed the traffic in, which is nice. So you'll see kubelet probes in there. You'll see whether the default policies get used, or you'll see whether you've used a configured server authorization to allow that traffic in. Yeah, and then the next are kind of wiring some of those labels through into some of the CLIs. So we'll probably at least have stat, the CLI command, work with policies. So you can say, give me the stats for the server, or give me the stats for this authorization, perhaps. And other than that, we're kind of just doing testing. So I think next week's Edge is likely to be the first release candidate. This week we're still moving some things around, but I think next week's Edge will be pretty close to getting our Cs out, which means we're going to start, expanding testing, probably doing a little bit more integration testing, probably cleaning up some of our tests because they're a little bit slow, and investing in docs and just getting some usability stuff in there. So if you're really brave, you can maybe figure out how to use this based on some of our design repos and things like that. But we'll probably have better docs coming up in a week or two on how to start testing this. But in the meantime, just running Linkerd's latest edges, especially this week's, and letting us know if there are issues, is super valuable. So we're really getting into the final stretch before stable goes out. We just need to make sure it works in your weird cloud provider's configuration, because it works in CI, but that's not usually enough for folks.
So our asks are, number one, take the latest Edge and run it with like regular traffic and just let us know if anything breaks. And number two, once the RC is out, try some of the policy stuff and let us know if anything breaks.
That's right. Yeah.
And number three, tweet about how amazing everything is and tell your friends.
Yeah, and then I think for 2.12 the plan is to kind of expand policy a little bit more, so a little bit richer inbound policy, and starting to wire this through onto similar things for outbound policies, especially for egress traffic, and starting to kind of make that more complete. So, getting your feature requests in over the next couple of weeks is going to be really helpful as we start planning the 2.12 work coming up.
Awesome, thanks, Oliver. I think, the asks there are clear, so we could definitely use your help in getting the edges tested, and that's going to help get to the 11 out faster. Okay, well, moving on from there, we have our special guests with us today, Chris and Dan. So they are going to tell us, well, I have a ton of questions for Chris and Dan to talk about their experiences with migrating a monolithic application. But first, we'll get to know them a little bit and learn about their experiences with Linkerd. So Chris and Dan, I invite you to unmute yourselves and say hello.
Hey.
Hi.
Thanks for joining today. How's your morning going so far? I know that you two are US based.
Yeah, so far so good. This is a good morning highlight.
It's a fun way to start the day. I'll tell you that when that Monday rolls around for our community meeting week, it's actually something I look forward to by the end of the week. So, okay, so this is probably the first time that I think we've had two people on that I get to ask questions of. So feel free to, I'm going to throw questions out there, and feel free to jump in whenever you feel like it. Whomever of you thinks has the best answer to the question will get the highest amount of points, and we'll tally them at the end to see who wins. No, I'm just kidding there. I understand that the two of you work together in cloud architecture roles. What was that journey like? And I'll ask this of both of you, because I think this is a valuable experience to understand how one gets to becoming a cloud architect, especially after spending a lot of time in the industry. And I also think this helps some of the folks who are entering in, the younger folks who may be graduating school who want to become cloud architects. So would each of you mind sharing a minute or two of how you got to where you are? And we'll go alphabetical order. So I'll go Chris and then Daniel.
Yeah, luckily you'll have a similar story. So Dan and I have actually been working together pretty closely for about 9 years. And we really, I don't know if Dan will agree with everything because we haven't exactly had this conversation on the side. But we kind of started the DevOps journey in a lot of ways together. So we were working mostly in like a front end app. And then just as things evolved with our application and as priorities changed, it became clear we needed to invest more in the infrastructure, adopt things like CI/CD, immutable infrastructure as code, kind of all the best practices that we're starting to kind of come to fruition in the community. So we started kind of moving more in that direction and got a lot of experience with Docker, AWS, Terraform. We ran a microservice application on Docker Swarm for quite a while. We learned how to do a migration from like a monolith to microservices, including like, what things you need to do to make that work, like having an ingress that's kind of diverting some traffic over to your microservices, sending the rest of the traffic to the monolith, allowing you to kind of peel things off over time. Specifically, the architecture role for me was mostly just like an opportunity that came up, really. It's not really something you can necessarily plan for, but I was working on a team kind of defining the next gen architecture for a cloud platform that was being developed. And maybe I got left with the short straw or something, but everyone else seemed to walk away afterwards and I was left there to build it. So that's kind of how that came about.
Gotcha. And Dan?
Yeah, like Chris said, a lot of our story is kind of the same. I had been at HP a lot longer than Chris probably, but yeah, the last that he was there was doing cloud software, like you said, and started out as a monolith, moved to Docker Swarm, and then now, I'm adding these apps to this new platform that we're building on Kubernetes with Linkerd. And I kind of fell into it. I've been at HP for 20 years and I've done all kinds of things. I started out building installer software on CDs, and some of the people on here have never seen a CD. Yeah, right.
What's a CD? Where do I put it into my laptop?
Yeah, exactly. Things have changed a lot since then, but just kind of, I think the skills, somehow people thought I was able to handle the kind of the weird stuff that happens in the cloud and the things. So I got put on this team with Chris, and you can plan it or you can ride the wave and get on it, I guess.
Gotcha. So it sounds like the two of you are collaborating on a book called The Accidental Cloud Architect.
Awesome.
That's great. And so I'm curious about the monolithic migration part, and we talk about digital transformation, which I know that's a trigger phrase for some people, and other people think it's great. I think it's mostly the suits that think it's great. So how long did that take? And I ask this question we do get folks we talk to people in the Linkerd community who are at some point in that journey of theirs. And so, you've always got the business folks who are saying, let's get this done. How do we get this done? How would you properly scope the time that it takes to do a transformation like that, a migration?
There's probably a couple of things to say about that. First, in the context of HP, a digital transformation meant moving from like purely hardware transactional product type business to more software services, right? So more things are delivered as a service. I think it's been shown over the last 10, 20 years that that's a super great business model, right? So yeah, it's very much digital transformation to me is very like corpo exec speak for let's do more cloudy things. So there's that, and then like how long does it take? Well, I'm reminded of like some post about Google's transformation from like just using like data centers directly to using their Borg system. And the analogy was like Google's like a massive ship and you can't just like turn it really quickly, right? So same exact thing for HP. So it's like a really long journey. We're talking like 5-ish years at a minimum, I would assume. It's still ongoing. I was there for probably 2 or 3 years of that, based on some definitions of when that started. I think part of the problem or part of the hard part is when you're in a big organization, sometimes you don't even have, the steering wheel on your ship to turn it, right? So you need to build those mechanisms in. So like HP developed like a transformation office that would try to identify those things that needed to change, that needed to transform. Because otherwise you'll just kind of be stuck in your old ways. So yeah, as far as like how long it takes, it's definitely a long time scale.
That makes sense. Dan, do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. It takes a while. I don't know that. Well, we were able to get the monolith that we had, and that was kind of on a prior team to Docker Swarm by using kind of Windows containers, which we've never tried to do that on Kubernetes. So that thing still exists, but a lot of it's just identify the new stuff that you can build around it and get that onto the more modern architectures, and then slowly chip away at the the monolith. I mean, maybe other teams or other products could do that faster, but at HP there's so much going on right now. It's just like you got to focus on the new stuff and then slowly bring on that stuff along.
Well, I couldn't have asked the two of you to tee me up with this next question more perfectly. Speaking of the new stuff, tell me about how you got involved with Linkerd and Service Mesh as a category, and how that helped the process that you're migrating, your migration process.
I think for me, it was really trying to be able to better answer questions about what was going on in our microservice applications. So we started off by investing a lot in logging with our monolith, which was a huge amount of work getting everyone familiar with the tools and the concepts. But then you go to microservices and all of a sudden there's just things that break like randomly and it's not clear what's going on. So I was really interested from like how could we at an infrastructure level get more information about what's going on, so that we could provide that feedback to the development teams, so they could get their jobs done. So that's really like the genesis of it. I also had kind of like a personal like belief that like eventually everything was going to run through a proxy. Like I would play with Docker a lot. Like locally, you could do this thing called linking, and so I really loved this because you could like just put your database. Like you could say you could almost hard code the connection string to your database. So it's like always Mongo 2717. And it's always going to be there, and I'll just use Docker to like make that happen. So I was thinking like, oh well, why wouldn't this work in like a production environment too? Why can't the infrastructure just inject all this stuff in so that it can just magically say, yep, same exact connection string, I want Mongo. The infrastructure figures that out. So I was assuming that eventually everything would run through a proxy like that to kind of like do the smarts behind. Here's the application level concerns. I need a database to. What are the IP addresses? What are the encryption things I need to do? All that stuff could just be handled by the infrastructure. So that's kind of where I was at. Obviously, I think the first step was just to do it with HTTP stuff because that was mostly what we were dealing with. So yeah, that's how we got into it. How I found about Linkerd, a colleague of mine just happened upon the information and kind of sent it my way. He's like, hey, you should check this out. It's another, I think it was called Conduit then. He's like, yeah, you should check out this project. It's by, the Linkerd folks. I think we knew of Linkerd 1 at that point. Some of this stuff is like hard to remember. It's like, what did I know when? So I think we kind of generally aware of Linkerd 1. And they were like, here's Conduit, kind of like the next thing. So it's like, okay, that's going on our radar because we kind of respected the kind of trailblazing that Linkerd 1 was.
Got it. That sounds sounds great, and it sounds like we owe a hat and a T-shirt to whomever your colleague was for getting you started on it.
I think we have some Conduit socks still that we have no use for anymore. Maybe we can send this person some Conduit socks.
That would be awesome. I haven't seen him since COVID started, so it'd be a good trip to his house too. I could deliver him.
All right, we'll follow up with you after. So one of the things that I'm just going to say it, like people are often, they misunderstand what a service mesh is. Was that a difficult sell for you, for the two of you, and either of you feel free to answer the question. Was it a difficult sell for you to bring Linkerd into your application? And if so, how were you able to convince folks? Like, did you come up with a specific way of explaining service mesh in Linkerd so that folks would understand it and really see the value?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely. I think it's gotten harder to learn about service mesh as time has gone on. I think initially it was simpler because there was less information, maybe less conflicting information out there.
Gotcha.
And so I think that made it easier. I mean, really for me, when I'm talking about it with people, and I'd love to hear what Dan's perspective is on this, because I think he kind of got thrown into it at some point. I really just start from the principle of here's a layer, here's a piece of software that the infrastructure owns called the proxy, and we can make it do stuff. And we can make it do like really useful stuff. And here's kind of the 4 or 5 features that I want you to care about and think about, and everything else is just magic and don't worry about it. And I think that's gotten, I think that's been useful. The other thing, Dan did something pretty nice. I mean, I think at times we've like hidden a lot of the Linkerd-ish stuff from the development teams. So they don't even really know a proxy's running. It's just like, oh yeah, the infrastructure can kind of do these things. But yeah, Dan, I don't know what your experience was kind of like jumping into Linkerd.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we had to sell it to anybody, although I think maybe Chris was more involved with that decision than I was. But, we were just kind of tasked with building this platform to run microservices on. And it's an easy install for the most part. Well, I can get back into that in a second, but I think like the MTLS encryption is super nice, just from a security perspective, and you don't really have to even barely worry about it. We use Flagger for doing canary deploys, which is a really nice feature, I think. And that's kind of a cool demo you can see on on YouTube or wherever, I think. So I think, just those 2 things alone was enough to say, we need something like this. And
Gotcha.
I hear that, the nightmares about 14 people teams to do Linkerd support. And it's basically just me for Linkerd right now, I think.
Wait, there are nightmares of 14 people supporting Linkerd?
No, Istio.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I've heard the nightmares of those teams as well.
Yeah. So fortunately, I've never, experienced that myself, but I've never had to. But yeah, I mean, I think Linkerd is relatively easy to support on your own. But yeah, like Chris said, we kind of built this platform to deploy services, and primarily we drive it through, CI/CD and through, logging and monitoring through like Splunk and Grafana. So we kind of try to hide Kubernetes even and Linkerd from them. it would be interesting to see how we could expose some more of the kind of like debugging features that you should be able to get from Linkerd to teams without giving them too much.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to expose taps somehow, but well, it'd be cool if you could.
Oh, well, hold on to that thought. But what I'm hearing is when people come and ask you how you're doing all this amazing work, you just say, just trust the process. I know what I'm doing. Don't ask how the sausage is being made.
That's, yeah, fairly accurate, I think.
I would say any good platform is going to have a healthy amount of abstraction. Otherwise, it's not really doing too much, right?
Yeah. So. Okay, so then the thought I asked you to hold on to is the question that I like to ask all of our guests. If you could add any feature to Linkerd, what would it be? And it sounds like exposing tap so people could, your developers could get access to it and debug.
So I think that is more on. So I've since left the team. I don't know if we made that clear, but yeah, I think that's something that the platform, the HP platform, can do with the stuff that's already there. Feature-wise, I mean, the thing I've been probably hammering on for the longest was policy, so I'm super excited to see that.
Yes.
Yeah, policy is like. It's like vegetables, right? I mean, it's like not super exciting, but it's like you need it. It's good for you, and your security team's gonna love it. So policy is great. One thing I was actually thinking of that might be kind of small is somehow exposing how many retries are occurring in the system, and maybe as like a percentage of your budget or as a percentage of overall traffic. Because one thing that was hard to understand was how much value we were getting out of retry configs. And so being able to show that might be kind of cool. The other thing would be alerting on it, right? Because you might be able to get like preemptive understanding of a degraded system. Like maybe the retries are covering it up, but maybe it's in some sort of degraded state. Like maybe you're getting like, normal is like 1% of traffic is retried. Oh, now we're up to 5%. Okay, what might be going wrong? How can we get ahead of this so that our customers never see it, but this doesn't get worse or anything like that? Yeah, so there you go. More visibility into retry metrics.
Okay, that makes sense. And that the scenario that you described where retries are fixing a degraded situation, I believe is exactly what the Emoji Voto application is built to do. So you're totally right in that there is an error in the application. It's not performing the way that it's supposed to, but through these reconciliation measures or these reliability features in Linkerd, your customers aren't affected, but it's still up to the team to be able to go in and understand what's happening and go in and fix that issue so that you're not retrying as much. You're actually getting those requests going through on the first go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Well, great. I'm going to try something new today. Do you have any questions for me or for us?
Not really putting us on the spot.
Yeah. If not, that's okay.
When are we going to get a blog post on Linkerd's stance on eBPF?
We'll have to talk to the chief.
I hear eBPF is eating the world and everything should be re-implemented in that frame.
Oh boy, that is definitely a topic that's been kicked around, and I think in order to get it properly written, it has to go through the PR snark filter.
All right.
Yeah. I had about 6 answers to that, but I'm just
that's the
including WASM for eBPF, and why don't we just run Envoy in the kernel? But yeah. Great idea. We'll add that to the list. eBPF
we appreciate both of you joining us, and you're the first alliterative interviewees we've had, Chris Campbell and Daniel Duggan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate all of your thoughts, and super helpful. I hope the community, I hope you all got something useful out of this as well. So with that, thanks y'all. Let me jump back over to screen sharing, and we're going to now move over to Alejandro, and he's going to tell us all about what has changed in Helm and why.
Thank you very much, Charles, Dan, and Chris. So I'm gonna tell you today what are our plans for Helm charts. It seems like we lost the screen sharing, Charles.
Oh yeah, sorry. My bad. I'm new at this.
So what I'm gonna tell you about won't likely make it into 2.11. First, because we need to make some small changes there, and also most importantly, because we'd like to gather some feedback from the community regarding what are the Helm patterns that you are using in your CD pipelines and whether what we're going to change might impact you. So we'd love to hear how your workflows look like. And there are other reasons. It's not necessarily to have this in 2.11. I'll let you know in a little bit. So long ago, we had already refactored our charts to work with Helm v3, although they still are working in the v2 way of doing things. As you know, v2 had the infamous Tiller component that was a component deployed in a separate namespace. It requires some very specific RBAC to be configured, especially in hardened big clusters, so it wasn't trivial. And it was the place to manage in a centralized way all the configurations for all your charts. So in v3, this component was dropped, and the best practice now is to, well, most of the logic has been moved into the Helm client side of things, and the configuration is stored as a secret in the namespace for each one of those charts. So the best practice is to have the charts not create their namespaces, but instead create that out of band, possibly as a separate step in your pipeline, given more admin privileges, and then either do that or have Helm create namespace separately. So we actually don't do that right now. The obvious way, the most naive way of installing Linkerd with Helm currently is using that first command you see there, which is, I guess, what most people use. The downside of that is that the configuration will get stored as a secret in the default namespace, so which is not advisable if you have a big multi-tenant cluster, because it's likely that the default namespace won't be properly isolated. So right now, as a workaround, what you have at your disposal is using this install namespace variable. If you set it to false, then the chart won't try to create the namespace. You can create it separately or have Helm create it automatically with create namespace. And in that case, the configuration would get stored appropriately under the Linkerd namespace. Next slide, please. So we want to get rid of that for our next Helm charts iterations. So first thing we're doing is stop creating that namespace inside the charts. Wherever in the templates we need to make reference to the namespace, we will use the release.namespace variable, which just points to the namespace that was passed to the Helm CLI. And this also has the advantage that you could use Helm similarly like you use kubectl. You might have seen several manifests that are totally namespace agnostic, and you just declare with kubectl where you want to persist those resources in what namespace. So if you don't have the namespace created in your chart, you can do the same thing with Helm, which could help in various CD scenarios. So we're going to do this both for the core chart and for all our extension charts, but there's a small caveat in those cases. For identifying our extensions, we have a label in the namespace. So for example, Linkerd check utilities will select all the namespaces that have that label in order to trigger the checks on those extensions hosted on those namespaces. And since no longer the charts will be able to create the namespaces, we can't add that label. So what we do is we use a post-install Helm hook that will do that for us. And that is going to be a very simple shell script, very transparent. And so in theory, that should just work. If you're interested in that effort, that's the PR. It's really easy to find in our Linkerd 2 repo under the area Helm labels. This is a breaking change. You will have to uninstall your current charts and install these new ones. So we're taking the opportunity to club this together with another chart, with another change. So next slide, please, which is about splitting the charts. In 2.11, we will ship 4 CRDs in the core chart, which are traffic split, service profile, and the new server and server authorization CRDs, which pertain to the policy side of things. It would be great if we could, at the same time, persist instances of service profiles, but more importantly, of servers and service authorization. We won't do that in 2.11, maybe later, so we want to leave the door open for that. So that's why these changes are not necessarily making to 2.11, but most likely to 2.12. And this is not doable in the simplest of ways. We can't just declare a CRD definition in the template and right next to it declare it instances, because CRDs take a while to be available, their APIs. And if you try to instantiate an instance without the API being available, that will result in an installation error. So the recommended methods that Helm recommends are first putting the CRDs under a CRD subdirectory under templates. That has the downside that even though it will install the CRD during your first installation, you won't be able to upgrade them or eventually delete them. You will have to provide users with special manual instructions to do that. Helm is doing that because there are a lot of scenarios in which this can go wrong. For example, you could have a CRD that is shared by multiple charts, and if you delete the CRD, you will get rid of all the instances without users necessarily knowing. So there are a lot of scenarios like that that could go wrong. In our particular case, things are much simpler. So we don't want to go down the road of having to provide manual instructions for users over each upgrade. Instead of that, we're adopting the second method, which is simply using a separate chart for the CRDs as a first step, and as a second step, another chart for everything else. In our particular case, we will have likely a Linkerd base chart, which will install not only the CRDs, but also all the cluster level resources. So an admin level user would have to install that chart. And as a second step, a Linkerd control plane chart that will install everything else, that is all the namespace level resources, which means that not as high as admin privileges will be required to install that. Most likely, both charts would have separate release cycles. Linkerd base not necessarily will have to be upgraded upon each edge or maybe even each stable release, whereas Linkerd control plane will. So that's a secondary benefit of doing this. And yeah, that's it. This effort is tracked in this PR. We also welcome your feedback about how this might impact your CD workflows. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alejandro. That is super awesome. I really appreciated the history there between Helm 2 and Helm 3 with the tiller aspect, because I'm always thrown off. Like, I know that I've installed something using Helm, and I do a Helm LS and I don't see it there. but then when I do Helm ls-a, I see, oh, it's in this namespace. So I'm slowly learning, but it's tough to teach this old dog new tricks. You mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned the post-install hook, because there was a user in Linkerd Slack who was installing Linkerd charts through a pipeline, and they ran into an issue with the Linkerd namespace specifically, because that has the annotation of linkerd.io inject disabled. And when this person was creating the namespace, they hadn't added that annotation. So if we aren't doing it already, we may need to take a look at post-install script for the Linkerd namespace as well, because there are other labels on there in addition to just the inject annotation. But knowing you, you probably have that all covered already, because I know you're very thorough on these things. I did have one question. You had the create namespace flag set on the Helm install. Actually, I have control over the slides, so why don't I go back? Here on the workaround, you've got this create namespace flag, and then you also have set install namespace to false. So I know that you touched on it, but it didn't sink in for me. So this tells Helm to create the namespace, but not put Linkerd into the namespace.
Means that the responsibility of creating the namespace is on the Helm tool itself. It will first install the namespace, and then the Linkerd charts will get installed without them installing again the namespace. Otherwise,
okay. Got it. Thank you. Now it makes sense to me. Yeah, this is awesome. And the last thing I had, thought that I had is this CRD deployment method. I've seen other projects where they have like just a separate YAML file that you do kube control apply that YAML file, and then you can do the Helm install. And that YAML file is for their CRDs, which sounds like this Linkerd base chart is just a different way of doing something like that, which I like. And the thing that stuck out to me about that is that one of the lesser used features, I believe, of Linkerd, at least I don't hear people talking about it very much, is the multi-stage install, where you divide the responsibilities of, an admin needs to install these pieces, but somebody with other security permissions or lower security permissions can install the other parts of the control plane. So I mostly say that just to remind folks that it's there, but it sounds like this design pattern that you've chosen is in line with supporting that as well.
As currently, it exactly mimics what we have on Linkerd CLI stage install, which it seems is not that popular, but maybe the Helm side of things would be more popular, because that's intended for production environments where you would have different actors with different privileges. So it would make more sense there.
Yeah. I like to think that we don't hear about it because people don't have any problems with it and it works great for them. So I don't know. But this has been a very informative talk. I mean, I really appreciate all this information. It helps me to understand the work that's going on. And so thanks for all your hard work, Alejandro. Okay, now we're getting towards the end of the meeting, and it's time to announce the August Linkerd Hero. And the drum roll, and here we go. It is Dom DiPasquale, who is our host last month, which feels like last week sometimes. Yeah. Thanks, Dom, and it's good to see you again. So, the reason that you've been selected as a hero is because you're a huge part of the Linkerd community, as we discussed last month. But and your Service MeshCon Europe talk, you shared how you and your team were able to deliver the results for 68,000 COVID tests and get people tested on the Penn State campus. We will link to that video, and if you weren't at last month's Linkerd community meetup, then we'll link to that as well, and you can take a look at my conversation with Dom. So, Dom, how's it feel? Give us a few words. You just won Linkerd Hero. What are you going to do next?
Sure. So thanks for shipping out this trophy to me, guys. I appreciate that. Don't know why there's a dancer on the top, but what can you do? I appreciate it. And I was telling Catherine in an email the other day, I don't know. All we did was use it as intended. So thanks.
Sometimes that is a heroic effort just to be bold and use something new that, again, I think Surface Mesh can often be misunderstood, but thanks to folks like you, people are understanding it better. And so you and Chris and Dan, who are really championing Linkerd, we appreciate you. So thank you so much, and congratulations on the Linkerd Hero.
Thanks again.
I just wanted to say something real quick. So Dom, a lot of people do use Linkerd, we know, and that's really important. But what very few people do compared to the people who are using it is actually sharing their experience, and that is super valuable. So it's great if people are using it and just getting tons of benefit out of it, but like once they go in public and share that with the community, that is super, super valuable. And so that's the difference. It's not that you've used that is great, but that the fact that you're sharing it and people have learned from it, that's what we value specifically. So thank you again.
We will continue to do so.
Awesome. Thank you. And for all of you in the community, if you know somebody who, like Dom, is using Linkerd to help people and to make their applications run more smoothly, and you want to nominate them because they've helped you, please visit this link, linkerd.io, nominate hero, and you can pick anybody who is not a buoyant employee to be a hero. And with that, we have a couple more minutes for questions. So I will kick it over to the community. Let's see. I haven't looked at chat yet, so I'll just poke over here. Oh goodness, y'all been busy. Thank you, Catherine, for posting those things. I don't see any questions in here other than asking about plushies. I hope there's a Linkerd mascot plushie. My kid's going to get one. My dog's going to get one. My friend's dog's going to get one. So I hope there is one.
If anyone has a question for Alejandro or Oliver or any of the maintainers, now's your chance. Just type it into the chat. Or if you have a question for Dom or Chris or Dan, you can ask them too. They'll be forced to answer it, recorded live off the cuff. Trick questions, gotcha questions are encouraged.
No, going once, going twice. Oh, here we go. Dom asked a question. Linkerd CLI install will still be available for the future, right? Yes, that's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Plans to.
If I may answer, the Linkerd CLI's objective is to be like the first interaction that users would have with Linkerd, because it just works. So it should be very simple. It will continue to be simple. There's an issue that we're discussing, the same thing that I mentioned, that you cannot install the CRD and right away install its instances. So the CLI will have to take that into account. Maybe what we're thinking on doing is having not necessarily pipe the results of the Linkerd CLI into kube control, but have the actual CLI do the persistent itself, so it can deal with this waiting for the API to be ready. So we don't know yet. That's not being planned just yet, because that's separate from this Helm side of things. But yeah, rest assured for sure that the CLI will be available for the time being.
Thanks, Alejandro. Very thorough answer. Okay, last chance. Going once, going twice. I really appreciate everybody who joined. We appreciate everybody who joined. Thank you all for being part of the community. If you have feedback about these meetups in general, let us know. We always want to make them more interesting and engaging for y'all. Become an anchor, nominate your heroes, tell your friends and family about Linkerd, and we'll keep an eye out for the Edge today. Anything else that I'm missing? Catherine, William, Oliver? No?
Thanks for coming, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.